Hi, welcome to another English language A-level video. This one is on another form of international English, and we turn our attention to L2 English with big focus on Indian English. So let's go. So L2 English is where countries have had a substantial trade with speakers of English as a first language. So we're talking about all of those many countries, and we're talking about over 50 countries in the world where English has a kind of special status. These are countries which typically were colonized by Britain, but not exclusively so. And in these countries, English is used. It's used in government, it's used in education, and it's used in trade. If you put together all of the total number of L2 English users across the world, they far outnumber the number of native English users. And we're talking about these sorts of geographical areas. So the Americas, places like the Caribbean islands and Guyana and Belize, go across the Pacific to the smaller islands like Kiribati, and enormous countries with huge populations like the Philippines. Go to India, you got India and Pakistan and the Maldives. And then, of course, Africa. You got Southern Africa, places like South Africa itself, but, Zimbabwe, Namibia. You've got Central and Eastern Africa, with countries like Kenya. And then you've got West Africa. I mean, Nigeria, for example, has something like a population of over 120 million people, and something like half of them are users of English. So we're talking about huge numbers of users of English as a second language. Okay, and of course, just as in L1 English, there's huge variation. There's huge variation in the forms of English that's spoken there. At the highest social levels, you've got use that is very close to Standard English, British or American Standard English. But in lots of countries, that form of English is actually quite stigmatized because young people, young speakers are wanting to claim language for themselves. They're wanting to cut ties with the colonial roots of the language and establish their own identity. If you listen to L2 English, it's often syllable timed rather than stress timed. Now, what do I mean by that? Stress timed means that you put certain stress on syllables, like in a sentence, there may be 3 or 4 certain syllables that are stressed. So if you look at English as a second language, listen to the way that I'm saying that. This is British English. English as a second language. I'm putting the stress here on ing and the second. So those are the 2 main stresses in that noun phrase. Now, if I'm speaking this in a syllable timed way, then I'm giving just about equal stress to each syllable. So it's going to sound much more staccato. English as a second language, like that. So many L2 English forms are syllable timed rather than stress timed. And you're going to hear differences in the grammar as well. I mean, we will look at specific examples of this with Indian English, but sometimes it's to do with, are you counting words as count nouns or non-count nouns? That's what it means here by noun and number. Are you going to be including articles like the definite article or the indefinite article? And what kind of prepositions are you going to be using? So these are the things to look out for when you're looking at texts that are written or spoken by L2 English users, and verbs as well. So, for example, Indian English does interesting things with the progressive aspect of the verb. Now, it so happens that in British Standard English, we don't tend to use the progressive aspect, i.e. the ing ending, when we're looking at stative or mental verbs. We don't tend to say, I am believing in God, for example. Whereas in Indian English, it's very common to be saying things like, I am understanding it. She is knowing the answer. So those are all examples of mental stative verbs, which in Indian English, it's very common to use as a progressive aspect. So there are some distinctive grammatical differences in some forms of L2 English. And in words as well, lexis, so L2 English is likely to incorporate terms, of course, from those indigenous languages, and those words that they're going to reflect the culture, and they're going to reflect the roots of the contact between that country and other English speakers. So, for example, in Indian English, you do come across a lot of vocabulary which may sound a little bit outdated and archaic, and it's a kind of reflection of contact with the Raj and the British Empire. Words like bankwalla, for example. Now, there's an interesting example of a hyphenated compound where you've got two words that have been bunged together from different etymological roots. So you've got bank on the one hand, with this European etymological root, and then you've got walla, meaning a person working in a certain place, on the other. So hyphenated together, making a combined word. So the lexis is something to draw attention to. Also the discourse, and when you're looking at the discourse, look at the levels of formality, because Indian English seems to have a much higher degree of levels of formality. Latinate lexis, for example, which we would associate with education and advancement. You're likely to hear that and see that in lots of Indian texts. And basically in the same way as we have that ornate form of English in 18th and 19th century English written text, because basically it's a statement about education and about status. As always, David Crystal has some interesting things to say about the trajectory of Indian English. That's on YouTube, so I would have a look at that if I were you. Let's now hone in particularly on Indian English and look at particular language levels. So we're going to start off with, well, before we get onto the language levels, let's just do the overview of the history. This is just taken directly from the AQA textbook. So in the 18th century, British influence began, and it was the establishment of the East India Company in Calcutta that really started it off. And then over time, the British gradually assumed control over governments and law and education. And of course, this led to a division within India between those who saw English as the key to Western knowledge. You know, if you're going to get on in the world, you've got to be speaking and using English, and others who wanted to preserve the local classical languages. And so in the 20th century, we see the independence of Britain from the British Empire in 1947. And in our current time, there has, of course, been enormous economic growth, partly based on the growth of IT. So in India, English continues to be used, and it continues to be seen as a symbol of personal identity by many. This is where we go to the language levels and try and break it down in terms of phonology and lexis and grammar. There's a good video here, how to speak with an Indian accent. I'm not going to play it for you on this now, but what it does is it focuses in.
Hello, my name is Anigo.
I'm going to stop that. So focus in on the particular phonemes. So if I can just talk you through these. So first of all, he starts off with t. And the point he makes is that in Indian English, often it becomes more accentuated, so it becomes more like a t sound like that, where the tongue hits the top of the mouth. So t becomes d, so bit becomes bit, like that. He also says that the l is more accentuated, so he takes a word like table, like that. So the l sound, more is going on there with the tongue. And then you've got W's. Often there's not a differentiation in Indian English between a W and a V sound. So water would become water, like that. And also the R tends to be more roticized, quite accentuated, a rolled R. So vater, r, like that. So t, l, w, and r. Those are the phonemes to listen out to as being quite distinctive in this form of Indian English. In the same way as, you know, travel around the UK, and you're going to be listening to different forms of phonemes, you know, in Scouse English and Glaswegian English and RP and all the rest of them. Okay, so let's now have a think about some of the vocabulary that you're going to be coming across in Indian English. So if you can work out what these might mean. His face cut is impressive. He speaks chaste, Hindi. The Congress Wallahs have voted against the motion. 3 men were accused in court of eve-teasing in central Mumbai train station. My yar lent me lakh rupees. Okay, so if you go back to the first one there, his face cut is impressive. That would strike us as being slightly odd in British Standard English. Presumably this just means a shave. So we've got a hyphenated compound word there. He speaks chaste Hindi. This is a pre-modifying adjective. It's a term of approval. So chaste here has connotations of something pure and good. Okay. And notice, just going back to that one, notice then the kind of social context of this, that purity is linked in with chastity, and therefore that's where you get that pre-modifying adjective as a term of approval, chaste. Congress wallahs, well, that links back to what I was saying about bank wallah. So wallah means a person working in a certain place, and Congress here means Parliament. So these are politicians that we're talking about. So again, an interesting mixture here between two words, two compounded words from different etymological backgrounds, one European and one from India. 3 men were accused in court of eve-teasing in central Mumbai train station. Eve-teasing is interesting because in a sense it sounds quite trivial. When you tease somebody, you're pulling their leg. But what this is about is actually sexual harassment. So it's one of these words where, in teasing would have a different connotation for a British English speaker. And it's interesting, isn't it, in terms of Eve as well. So presumably that's to do with Adam and Eve. So it's a very archaic form of talking about females. And finally, my yar lent me lakh rupees. So yar there means mate. So it's an informal way of saying a friend. And then lakh is interesting because it means 100,000. So if you think in British Standard English, we don't have an individual word to say 100,000, but sensibly Indian English does, lakh. So you've got some good examples there of some distinctive Indian English vocabulary. If we think about Indian English grammar, let's have a look at these. Litters should not be thrown on the street. You must pay attention on these figures. She is knowing the answer to this question. What he has eaten. I'm going to temple. She went back. No. Okay, let's go back through these, try and identify what is non-British about these, what's distinctive. This is to do with count and non-count nouns. So in British Standard English, litter would be an example of a non-count noun where you wouldn't put an S inflection ending on the end. You wouldn't put an S on the end. You do in Indian English. So litters is counted as a count noun. On this second one, you must pay attention on, so it's the prepositional usage here, because we would, in British Standard English, surely say you must pay attention to these figures. So different prepositional usage is something that you might see in Indian English. This is illustrating the point that I've already made, that you get much more uses of the progressive aspect of the verb, particularly on mental or stated verbs. She is knowing the answer. What he has eaten. So this is a question form. So in standard British English, you get the inversion of the primary auxiliary verb and the pronoun. Not so here in Indian English. I am going to temple, unless you're living in Yorkshire and you're eliding out particular sounds, then this sounds different to British Standard English, doesn't it? Because in Standard English, we would have the definite article before the temple. Okay, so in Indian English, you sometimes get included the definite and the indefinite articles where you wouldn't have it in British Standard English, and vice versa. Sometimes it's missed out. And then she went back, no. So what you've got here is an unchanging tag question, a bit like in it. Okay. So these are all distinctively Indian English grammatical forms, but like I've said before, you're going to actually hear a lot of variety, and you're going to hear some people speaking in a form that's much closer to a kind of American or British Standard English form, and other people using forms which are actually very different. And if we think about Indian English discourse, by which I mean looking at the language going across a whole text, let's look at how language is being used in an Indian newspaper. This is called the Central Chronicle, and thinking, well, how is it different from current standard British English? Vehicular traffic was not plying on roads, and industrial activity had come to a grinding halt in response to the band called Sri Amaranath Yatra Sangharsh Samiti, spearheading the ongoing agitation. However, traffic on the national highway from Lankapur to Jawahar Tunnel in the province was plying normally. Okay, so slightly different feel to the language here, isn't there? And let's hone in on some of the elements of Indian English discourse, which would strike us as being different to British Standard English. What about this verb plying? It's used twice here. It was not plying on the roads, and at the end there was plying normally. So this is a material verb. Here the meaning clearly is moving. I think what we would say from a British English perspective is that we would say, oh, well, plying is a bit of an archaism. There aren't many of us who use the word ply as a material verb in the way that it's being used here, or at least if we do use it, we just tend to use it in idiomatic expressions such as plying one's trade. So that's a great example of a word which to us now seems archaic and outdated, but has continued on as a kind of current form in Indian English. Band is an interesting one here. Did you work out what the meaning of this is from here? Band. So here it's an abstract noun. It's denoting industrial action. Okay, in response to the band. And so this is a word that's directly borrowed from Hindi. So that's a great example of how, Indian English borrows words from indigenous languages and, broadens the lexicon of the international language. And then you've got spearheading the ongoing agitation. Now, nothing different to us about all of those individual words, all common lexes, but perhaps we wouldn't combine them in this collocation. And spearheading is one of these verbs that you see a lot in Indian English texts. So to us, it's a more restricted kind of word. It wouldn't be used in so many situations, whereas in Indian English, it's very commonly seen. That's given you a bit of a sense of Indian English discourse. If you want to take this further, you could be reading the article which I've put in the booklet on page 75 called How India Changed the English Language. And I like the focus on this because rather than it saying, English is doing things to India, the focus here is on what Indian users of English are doing to the language. And it starts off like this. For hundreds of years, words have flowed along the routes of trade and empire. Rahul Verma follows some of their remarkable journeys. They are in there, often unnoticed. The words that have become part of everyday English. Loot, nirvana, pajamas, shampoo, shawl, bungalow, jungle, pundit, and thug. Great examples of very common Indian English root words. As global trade expanded through European conquests of the East Indies, the flow of Indian words into English gathered momentum. Many came via Portuguese. The Portuguese conquest of Goa dates back to the 16th century, and mango and curry both come to us via Portuguese. Mango began as mangai in Malayalam and Tamil, entering Portuguese as manga, and then English with an O ending, she says. So this is interesting because it shows in that Renaissance period the circuitous route that words end up in the English language, in this case via Portuguese. Hindi, Urdu, Tamil, Malayalam, Portuguese and English words pinballed around the globe in the 16th and 17th century, revealing how languages evolve over time as culture is made and remade and people adapt to conditions around them. I love this material word pinballed. I think that's a fantastic material verb there to use about the vocabulary that's moving around the globe. Okay, so that's given us a bit of an overview about L2 English and particularly Indian English. And in our next video, we're going to be looking at English as a lingua franca and other forms of English around the world. Thank you very much.